Jean Grand-Maître had only been artistic director of Alberta Ballet for a few years when New York City's dance magazine called his ballet company the Canadian Troupe to Watch. Do you remember that?
No.
You do remember that? The
magazine. I had it on my fridge.
You have it on your fridge? Well, the magazine clipping on his fridge credits the originality of the programming and the, quote, passionate commitment of its dancing. Jean Grand-Maître is also a dancer, a teacher, a director, and one of the most successful Canadian choreographers of his generation. I hope you would agree with that.
Depends on the day.
Depends on the day. He's worked with ballet companies all over the world. He's created work for theater festivals, opera companies, stage musicals. You've worked with circus performers, the Olympics, the opening and closing ceremonies, and both the big and the small screen. And his productions are typically, I think, a blend of classical ballet with modern stagecraft, sometimes popular contemporary music, and they've landed you some box office and critical success. So far, so good.
Which is rare, the two together.
Which is rare, the two together, and we'll get to that. He's produced ballets in concert with singers Joni Mitchell, Sir Elton John, and of course, as we know, he's also collaborated with Sarah McLachlan for the production of Fumbling Towards Ecstasy, which is a ballet that was developed here at the Banff Centre. And thanks to the generous support of Heather and Anne-Marie Edwards, Fumbling Towards Ecstasy returns to the Banff Centre Saturday evening for another performance. Please join me in welcoming back to the Banff Centre, Jean Grand-Maître.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've been at the Banff Centre quite a bit over a long time, right?
As a dancer, I started here in 1991.
Wow.
Or 1990. I've been trying to remember which year, but the first time I came to Alberta and to the Banff Centre was as a young dancer.
Back then you were, still in Montreal?
Yeah, I was still in Montreal, and I was coming out of an injury and near a retirement. And it was the finest 6 weeks I ever had, the dancing here at the Banff Centre. The time was Brian McDonald. And we had great teachers, great repertoire, and just being here was heavenly for someone from Quebec to discover this landscape.
Yeah, no kidding. When I hear of a ballet company earning international acclaim, like Alberta Ballet, I don't necessarily think Calgary or Edmonton. So why is it that your ballet connects with Alberta the way that it does?
Well, that's a good question, because ballet comes from the courts of Europe, from the 1700s, the aristocracy with Pavan and dance, and it got better and better until the one king one day decided it would be an art form and had a company that was professional. And this is interesting because you take this art form and suddenly you have to bring it to Alberta that has a young history, except for, of course, the First Nations.
Sure.
And so it's interesting because...
from Europe, you got to bring it to a young Alberta.
Yes, to an audience that is young, but that is eager and that is new and wants to discover, which is a carte blanche, for an artistic director in a way. Sometimes when you work in certain European cities, they have Munich likes more classical, Frankfurt's more contemporary. You go and different companies is a different approach. And so your work might not be well accepted. Like my work was not well accepted in Munich because they were more conservative. And Ivan has changed that company today. But when you arrive in a place like Alberta, where people love dance, they love athleticism, they love people who work hard and people who really give of themselves and do it with integrity, then you have the potential to build an identity for an arts organization and for us to stimulate them with all the forms of dance that exist and see which ones they really connect with. And so that's a privilege.
Yeah. And did you know that was going to happen when you came here 11 years ago, or was it a big risk moving to Calgary?
Oh, I didn't think it was a risk because I knew Mikko Nissanen, my predecessor at the Alberta Ballet, did a great job. And he really had a good roster of dancers, and they did a lot of the best ballets of the 20th century already. And but I didn't know about I was kind of naive because I didn't know about the deficit. The company was in deficit a bit. There was a bit of a demoralized ensemble because the director was leaving and half the company was splitting up. And it's difficult to take over an arts organization that's demoralized and in debt. But it was because this province is so amazing and the communities are so engaged in what we do. It turned around in less than a year. The deficit was gone and already there was a growing interest in what we were doing. And so I think connecting with the community absolutely is the success of survival in the arts in a very profound way, especially if you can go there. And I've seen that in Europe. And I saw how Balanchine developed ballet in the United States and how he connected with the people and their culture and their music. And so it's really about, moving from Quebec with that culture and coming to Alberta and trying to understand how what I know and what they know and what the dance can do connect and really make it happen at that level.
Well, so you had models to depend on when
Arnold
you first
Spohr,
got here.
the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, what Arnold did with the Royal Winnipeg, I think is still unequal today, that he took the Winnipeg company and took it to Moscow and Paris, and they were winning awards and in choreography and interpretation. And so and then you realize it's really about coming into a community and you're given these tools to stimulate people and excite people and challenge people and engage them. And so it's about using them well and making people proud of their culture and their art like they were in Quebec. That's why it emancipated itself. There has to be a buy-in from the community that what they do is as important as anything that happens in Paris or London. And so you have to inspire everybody and take them by the hand with the dancers and the board of directors and the janitors and the accountants and the marketing directors and take all this microcosm of a community and bring them towards something that we might all want to do together,
Small job.
It's really like you're the ever-ready man, and you're like I call them the GO at the Club Med, let's go to the swimming pool and do some workout and let's go on the beach and do some volleyball. So you're always trying to motivate people to believe in something. And that's really energizing because when you're a choreographer, when I was a choreographer before, just a choreographer, it was really about taking because I needed more time for rehearsal, more costumes and more scores, more music, more this. And when you're a director, it's about giving. What does marketing need today? What is the wardrobe department going to need? The dancers and so it changes the way you work and the way you think, and it makes you much more responsible that way and less demanding. And if I go choreograph now for another artistic director, I have a great sympathy for them.
Does it make it harder to choreograph then?
No, because I've been working with the same dancers now for many years, and that's fantastic because they understand where you want to go and what you want before sometimes you even do yourself. So that's been one of the great privileges of directing a company for so long is that some of the artists have been there all along.
Yeah. If you're going to direct a company, though, you got to go way back. At some point, you're dancing. And
yes,
you started dancing in your teens, I think.
Yeah.
Right? At what point? Do you remember, how far back does your memory go where you kind of clicked in and realized, well, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. Was there a moment?
When I convinced my parents, but at first, I was in a small town outside of Ottawa on the Quebec side.
Elmer,
Elmer. Yeah. Today it's called Gatineau. They've, amalgamated all these cities and end up with Rob Fords. And so Elmer was, near the art center, the National Art Center. So I would go all the time and when I could, and my mom was impressed because even at 12, I'd buy a bus ticket and I'd go and see a ballet performance or something I could see at the art center or a film. And so I always wanted to go and see culture very young. And so they encouraged me, but at one point they realized that, the dance was becoming quite a passion. There was all those films on television then with a lot of dance, the Fame and Flash dance, and even we could think of Saturday Night Fever. That was the big thing when
I've heard.
That
John
started
Travolta
me
was a
dancing
big
in high
influence.
school,
Yeah.
and suddenly I was popular because I could dance, and so then, of course, they're desperate for men in ballet, so I ended up very quickly in a ballet school in Montreal, and so it was a quick change around. It started late in my life. I was 17, so that made it difficult for me to be a very good dancer.
That does seem pretty late, right? Is it easier for a male dancer to start late?
Yes, because the women have to change the whole skeleton and go up on point and realign every bone in their body to do that.
Wow.
While the men, they have to do it as well, but it's much more about strength, jump, and lifting and power in that way. While women, it's about speed and ballet, and flexibility, balance, and control, and precision. But the interesting was that when I was young, I did some martial arts with my brother. And so I was very flexible, I could do the split. And so when I arrived at the school at Les Grands Ballets Canadiens in Montreal, which was Madame Chirieff, she could see I couldn't dance. I didn't have any coordination, but I was very flexible. So they accepted me just because of that. And
We can work with that.
yeah. They were desperate at the time to find. Today it's difficult still.
Yeah.
We used to say they had a sign in the subway near Le Grand in the metro saying, boys, free ballet, upstairs to try to get people in the building.
You said quite suddenly you were training as a ballet dancer.
Yes.
So what were those first days like, those first hours like, even suddenly you are taking this real serious track in learning a craft?
it's extraordinary because your first real professional training ballet class, everybody comes in there with the goal of becoming an artist and a dancer and to train their body to be their instrument. And at the time it was a drummer playing, and it was a modern dance class, my first class, and it was at York University. And suddenly you feel the ritual of it and the sacredness of it. There's something so sacred. It's like if you sing in a chorus or play with other musicians, there's something that happens and we connect with each other in a way that's very sensuous and very aware. And that awakened in me, something very strong, that it was something very special to become an artist. And, I envy painters and composers because they can work on their own, and then they can, when the muses are there, they can write their music or their books. There's like, Terpsichore has to show up at 3, and at 4:15, it's a union break. So, and so you're creating with a community of artists, which is very inspiring as well, and lonely artists appreciate that. Composers will tell me, I would love to be able to be creating with a group of people all day like that. It's something extraordinary. But in a way, what happened was I learned very quickly, because I had great teachers who, taught us the responsibility of the artist as well, and not just dancing well is your duty. Dancing with love and passion is what they can't teach you, and that's what you have to nourish yourself and keep alive, through the connections and what your experiences in life. But what they did teach me was the responsibility of the artist. I had a great teacher, Daniel Sellier, who came from the Marquis de Cuevas ballet, which was the Diaghilev generations, the Les Grands Ballets Russes, the Diaghilev. And so he taught us the responsibility of the artist in society, how important it is what we do, and to take it so seriously. So that was interesting, because at an early age, it wasn't just a frivolous passion we were living. We were taught that this was a big responsibility, what we were going to do within our community.
Huh. Speaking of responsibilities, one of the pieces that was responsible to getting you leaped on the international stage, I think back in '93, was a piece you choreographed called Frames of Mind.
Yes.
Right? That was created during a National Ballet of Canada workshop. And that piece has been described as a deconstruction of classical ballet. So what was it about classical ballet that you wanted to take apart even then?
It was the big trend at the time too, with William Forsythe. Everything was being deconstructed, and it was about modalities and improvisation. It was brilliant because we came out of the Living Theatre and Richard Schechner, and digging a hole in the ground, and the spectators watching a play, and they were breaking all the rules. And Forsythe was at the leading edge of this. And as a young choreographer, you learn from your masters. I studied Balanchine enormously, Krenko and Forsythe and Matzek. There were some Killian. And so it was interesting because the deconstructive aesthetic today doesn't even work anymore, because I think the world is living in such anxiety right now and stress that we need to go back to the arts to remember heroes, remember love, remember who we are, remember something that makes us human in a world that seems so out of control. But in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the art was really turning itself around, and it was about aesthetic, and it was reinventing everything in the form. It was about the form a lot. And that was a fabulous time, because it was also very profoundly human, and Forsythe, as aesthetic as his ballets are, they're very emotional as well. But it's interesting because that's what was inspiring me. So I decided, I was given 16 hours to create a ballet at the National Ballet of Canada. 16 hours is nothing.
It doesn't sound like it.
And it was like between 3 weeks. So I'd have 2 hours on Monday, wait 9 days. I'd have 3 hours, wait 4 days. And it was a company workshop.
So it's already deconstructed.
It was very... And so Reed Anderson was the director. He came from the Krenko legacy of encouraging young talent. He was amazing that way. And he said, okay, he saw a little duet I did once, and he said, we're going to give you a chance to do a workshop piece. I'm going to give you 6 principal dancers of the National Ballet of Canada. So I had Iser Lenvi, Martine Lamy, Greta Hodgkinson, Robert Tousley, Graham Mears, bless his soul, and Peter Ottman. And it was the crème de la crème of the National Ballet. And he gave me 16 hours, and he was looking, and I didn't know what to do. I had brought this score, which was Tchaikovsky played backwards. So it was John Zorn, the genius of John Zorn. And so I had this wonderful 9-minute score. I said, I can probably do 9 minutes. And the idea was that I would play a film of a classical ballet, as old as I could find, those old black and white, almost Chaplin sepia-colored films of ballerinas, and then I would do a really contemporary ballet that would be superimposed in front of that one, in almost flesh, like they look nude. And the ballet was much more about people encountering, and it was very violent sometimes, or very romantic. It was just human encounters with this old kind of Degas painting going on in the back. And it worked, and I didn't know how people would react to it, and it was really, the dancers were extraordinary. They were really, they taught me how to choreograph right away, how to work with talents of that caliber. And so Reed took it on tour to Europe, and he took it on tour across the US, and within a year, I was working in a restaurant as a waiter. Within a year, I was commissioned by the Paris Opera, La Scala, and the Stuttgart Ballet, the most biggest companies in Europe, and it was like a Cinderella turnaround. It happened very quickly that way.
Again, just suddenly.
Because of the National Ballet and Reed Anderson at the time.
So even back then, you're already thinking modern stagecraft techniques mixed with classical ballet traditions.
Yes,
That's always been a theme.
And I was 22 years in Quebec, looking at Robert Lepage, looking at the Cirque du Soleil, and the people there who were fusing art and aesthetic. It was a great time to be a young, developing artist. To see Gilles Maheu, Carbone 14, Marie Chouinard, they go on. There would have been 30 or 40 arts organizations in Montreal I would have loved to have gone seen any day, any time of year. There was so much going on.
So 93, you've got six dancers from the National Ballet of Canada in this piece.
Yes.
In 2010, you are choreographing the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics.
Yeah.
Not a small thing.
No.
You got a giant stadium. Literally, you got tens of millions of people watching.
Billions.
Yep.
Yeah, they said it was the highest rated winter opening ceremonies in history, and the highest rated Canadian television show in history was the opening ceremonies in Vancouver.
Not
and
too
people,
bad.
people were really waiting for this.
So what is it about a giant spectacle like the Olympics that appeals to you so much?
Well, at the time, what was extraordinary about that was that the sound engineer worked with Elvis Presley and was Barbra Streisand's sound engineer, and the lighting guy did the Academy Awards and the Grammys every year, and the costume designer was the head guy in Stratford, and it was the top people in the world. The guy who did the concept, David Atkins, who was Australian, is a genius. His first gig was he was hired by Boeing to launch a jet, and he hired the Melbourne Symphony and put it on the wings. And they pushed the jet into a hangar as people, in the Melbourne Symphony playing. And but right away people thought this guy's got ideas, and so he's like staging these opening ceremonies all over the world all the time, every 2 or 3 Olympics, because you're not allowed to hire the same team 2 Olympics in a row. And so I was working with these geniuses, and the performance art in the stadium is a new art form. It probably started, I think, it was in Russia. They were the first ones to really turn around an opening ceremony and make it something truly spectacular and inventive the way we see them today. And then after that, there were so many great opening ceremonies. I remember Philippe Découfflé in France, the Winter Olympics. Everybody came out of the snow. It was just, reinventing how art comes together, and projection, and acrobats with dancers and actors, and fill this space. It's quite a concept. It took 2 years for us to build that opening ceremony, and I didn't like the closing ceremonies very much. I didn't design them. I had to just support, but the opening we created together. Okay. And so for me it was the future. It's the future of the arts, the fusion of things, and working opera singers with actors, also saving the classics and saving all the great repertoire and the great works of art, and perform them with excellence. But the future of innovation in the arts, you really see that it's about fusion.
But is the work at the ceremonies itself sort of a version of, I've heard you talk about spectacle and exaggeration, and the exaggeration of the art form is something that appeals to you.
Yeah.
Is that, why is big so important to what you
Well, big and small. Sometimes I'd love to do something in a space like this, with 2 dancers, and the same 2 dancers for an hour. I'd love that. But big is exciting in the way that you're working with a lot of great people, different designers of all aspects and all trades, and in that way it's a huge learning moment. And I think as artists, I said this to some of my colleagues, when you get into this career and you decide this is going to be what you're going to do, as an artist, what you hope for is to reach your maximum in your career, that you can reach your potential, whatever that potential is, but that you can reach it, and that you have occasions that come to you to do that. But I can tell you that for me, working with these big projects is magnificent, but the biggest challenge would be to be in this room with 2 dancers, 1 light bulb, and to entertain and touch people and do something extremely profound, you know. And that takes experience and people who've choreographed a long time to be able to have that confidence.
So is the small the part that might intimidate you more? Have you ever been intimidated by the scope of a project in your career?
I'm more intimidated by the people I work with. Sometimes it's not as easy. You know, working in Europe was something else, you know, because these opera houses are huge industry of art. You know, they have great opera singers, great ballet dancers, but they produce, you know, every night, fill the houses. So when you're creating there, you never get all the dancers. There's a lot of injuries. They're performing Swan Lake that night. They're not concentrating. You're sometimes working with your 3rd cast, creating a ballet. So that the big opera houses are intimidating in the way that they're not always supporting true creation. And that's why if you look at the greatest ballets of the last 100 years, they were almost all created in private companies. It was Balanchine, it was Matsek, it was Girard, it was, you know, Forsyth and Killian. And the opera houses buy those ballets, and they've created some great ballets as well, and they're famous for their classical productions. But to create dance in an opera house in Europe was a real learning curve, and honing your craft is a big part of becoming a good choreographer or a good director, or, you know, to understand all the aspects of your craft and to keep that moving forward. Yeah. And so big projects are fantastic that way, but I was tired of being in the stadium with a headset and we're gonna drop the drapes, and you wait half hour, then the drape fall. Okay, we're gonna set it up, then it's another 2 hours. So I was eating a lot of cookies.
Where's the dancing?
Yeah. I was so happy when I got back in a little studio with 12 people and we were just working together. You know, it brought it back to the human scale.
You were talking earlier about the future is the fusion of art.
Yep.
Using the Olympics as an example of all the disciplines, and you've talked way back in the beginning, video projection and dancers together. Fumbling Towards Ecstasy is a ballet you produced with singer and songwriter Sarah McLachlan, and it's a fusion of modern contemporary music with classical traditional dance, right? And you've done it with Joni Mitchell, with Elton John.
Yeah.
I hear rumors of maybe a Peter Gabriel project.
I'm going to meet him after Christmas.
You're going to meet him after Christmas?
I had the most important pitch of my life, that one, because I love Peter Gabriel. You know, he's a visual as well as a musician, so.
Has that been like always a pinnacle you're trying to reach, or
but Peter Gabriel, I've always had him in the back of my mind.
Yeah. And so it may happen now.
Well, we'll see after Christmas, but he's certainly interested. He just was on a sabbatical for a year, and he just got back now and to work apparently, and so he spent the whole year on island of Sardinia. So he must be very inspired. Yeah. So I sent him pictures of all our other ballets productions with singers and Joni, and he's a big fan of Joni, and so the fact that Joni was attached to the list of singers made him very interested as well. So that Joni's still opening doors for us.
So what motivates you about working with pop icons?
Well, you know, it's first of all, it all started when we needed to find an interesting way to celebrate our 40th anniversary. And I was thinking, you know, Beethoven, 9th Symphony with a chorus of 100 and around and doing something everybody's notice. And a friend said, Joni Mitchell. Why not Joni Mitchell? She's from Alberta, Fort Macleod, and she's a visual artist. She might want to create a set design. And it all happened. You know, she loved the idea. She loved the dancers. They all fell in love with the dancers very much. And so it was so interesting because the media from around the world talked about it. The BBC came and did a documentary about it, you know, a ballet company in the middle of the Canadian prairies, and nobody had even heard, you know, that's why now they put Canada's Royal Winnipeg Ballet, because you would go in many places and you say, we're the Winnipeg Ballet or the Royal Winnipeg, and they'd say Winnipeg, and now they put Canada's, and they get more international touring, good for them, you know. But it's interesting that when I mentioned Alberta to Joni, she clicked in right away. You know, this was very special for her. And so when now I approach people like Peter or last year Katie Lang, the idea is that we have to meet them, because in ballet, the composers we work with died 100 years ago. Yeah. Most of them. And there's some very fortunate choreographers today working with living classical composers who work with orchestra. It's so expensive and there's no grants. It's really terrible. It's almost like they're discouraging it. At a government level, you know, because I tried to find grants to commission composers for orchestra, and they said there isn't any. I guess they're having a hard time even financing composition in just the orchestral department of the Canada Council. And so that way, I said, okay, how are we going to work with living composers who might be able to bring, and when Joni was such a success, we said we have to continue this. Also, even artistically, it was an incredible voyage to work with Joni, how we created the video art and the makeup design and the aesthetic of the dance and the narrative and the metaphors were powerful. She has this, uncanny theatricality in her music.
Yeah.
And so then I said, okay, we're going to have to meet the singers, and it's not just about getting the rights. You can get the rights to, the Rolling Stones and do a Rolling Stone ballet. It's not that difficult, but to meet with them and talk to them about their life and their music, that was the key.
The intimacy of
that was the key, and we needed that with Sarah McLachlan as well, and with KD, and so that the singer who wants to participate doesn't have to give us too much time, a couple of meetings, and if we're lucky, they come to the premiere, and they help us in creating maybe the soundtrack and choosing the songs. Mm-hmm. But it's been extraordinary because it's brought me to directions I never would have gone if I just kept working with classical music or even contemporary classical music.
You found surprises in it. Now I'm wondering if you find a necessity in joining classical ballet with modern music, in terms of connecting with a new audience? Or
absolutely, that way, yes. There's all the singers, Elton and Sarah was with us in Vancouver last week, where we premiered that piece with Sarah there, and she, all of them want to help us bring new audiences, first of all, because they know that for opera, ballet, orchestras, and maybe some forms of theater, that's the biggest challenge in the coming century, with everybody, even our dancers between breaks, and I'm like, can you, want to go to a theater with a community of people and experience something together, And so it's a challenge, and it's going to get more and more difficult. And so I realized, working with Joni, for me, Joni is as important to Canadian culture as Glenn Gould. She's just a genius. Sarah McLachlan is an icon of music all over the world. She's one of the great melodic writers. I mean, melody is not easy. Ask any composer, even classical. Melody is difficult, and it seems to pour out of her. And she has this attachment to the ocean and to ancient cultures and to the female ethos as well. So it was interesting because when you start meeting the singers, they start telling you about their life and their music, and you realize why they survived the decades in a world where pop stars are now prefabricated and built to last maybe 2 weeks. And so these people survived, and they survived because they have integrity and they have something to sing about, and they have this beautiful musical journey that way.
You did the texting,
yes,
in your dances. Why is the idea of connecting people so important to you in your work? Why is that theme of technological disconnect so in your heart that you need to tap into that and fix that?
I think passion is being lost too. There's something about even watching a dancer dance, the flesh of the body, it's so interesting every day. There's so much in the human body to admire. I've been watching it for a long time, and I've seen African dancers and folk dancers in China, and the most extraordinary movement the human body can do. If you think of a gymnast and a dancer, flamenco and ballet, and there's so much the human body can do. It's just extraordinary. And the richness of the human soul that goes with the dance, how you can understand people through movement and ourselves. So if the arts are there to teach us about how to live with ourselves and with others and with nature, it's about a communion of people that we learn something, we connect something, and it's being lost that way. I even have a hard time when I say to a young dancer, there's Romeo across the room, you see Romeo. Because my nail broke, my husband is divorcing me, and there's no emotion in that communication. And apparently when we talk to each other, 2/3 of what we say are said between words, just with pauses and expression. And this is human communication at its most basic form, and it's being lost. And I see it with young people and with dancers, where I try to keep them to open the mask, as we call it, the face and expression. And I find it terrifying because, like, when the dancers came into the Olympic Stadium, the first time we brought them up, and they were coming up the ramp, I mean, they rebuilt the stadium. It was extraordinary what they did. It was a white bowl of projection. And it was so extraordinary. And they all came up and they were twittering and tweeting, and they went like that, Then they went and looked and found a seat, and they were all like this. And it's like they're losing the sense of awe of life. And that's scary, because that's why arts are important, because they remind us how to be human, and we come together and we try to remember the awe of something and to have confidence in the future a bit and some optimism. And so when you take that away from the young people in the schools, and it's criminal. It's criminal to do that. There was a big fundraiser in Quebec for arts in school called "Violence is an Absence of Vocabulary," and that was a very powerful campaign. That if you take away from children the possibility to express themselves and to recreate their life, that's when you see a husband shoot his wife and kids when they want a divorce, because they can't recreate a new life, they can't express what they're feeling, and they become violent. And a society that has no culture can become violent. We've seen that. So there's a great importance, more than ever now, that we come together to the arts, whether it's art, ballet, or orchestra. But there's something about that philosophical platform that's still there, that we can think and go through ideas together. And I feel that the more we specialize people, the more we amputate people of their humanity. So that when you appreciate a work of art, your smell, your eyes, your memory, your instincts, your reasoning mind, your abstract mind, everything is working to come to a conclusion, and it keeps all of what makes you human operating, and I see that today it's bizarre how so much of it is being amputated, that way.
Yeah.
I even ask young dancers, do they know who Diaghilev is? They don't. Do you know who? They know Baryshnikov, but they don't have a sense of the. And I was in an Indigo bookstore, asked for a book on Mozart, and the girl said, "Can you spell it?" And I was in a bookstore, and so it was a bit frightening.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're reading on that.
Are you worried?
Yes, I'm worried a bit, in the sense I don't know if people will take time to read Shakespeare in 10 years. My lighting designer tells me his daughter doesn't even finish a song on her iPod. She switches songs. She doesn't go to the end of an emotion. She has to get another one. And attention deficit is there for sure, because when I was a dancer, and we always say that when I was but we could concentrate 3 hours on 8 bars of music. Now these dancers, I lose them. We have to keep them stimulated all the time, which is great in some ways, and they do reach excellence. But it's a different way of thinking already. You see a mutation there.
Yeah. Given what you're talking about, you grew up outside Ottawa in a family of government workers. Your family were all public servants, is that correct?
Well, my 2 sisters.
Your 2 sisters?
My father was an electrical engineer.
Okay.
And my mom was a mom.
Your mom was a mom.
Yeah.
That's a public service in itself.
The hardest job of them all.
I'm wondering, how can you see your dancing career as a public service?
How can you see it that way?
How is your dancing career a public service job?
Oh, because I sometimes, I say that because the more the governments ask us to do in the arts, because it used to be you created art was enough, now you have to do lobbying, you have to do education, outreach, it's all very important. You have to do, there's a million things we have to do, the staff. It's stretching us in so many ways. Fundraising, big one, of course, always been. But now we have to do, wellness and this and that. And so you start seeing that it's trying to connect the art with the community, for sure, and it's important. But at the heart of it, at the point of the pyramid, the goal is to create great art, for anybody who gets involved in the arts. So I'm always trying to fight, because everything that we try to do to help here and there takes away from rehearsal time or creation time, concentration on what's very profound about what we're trying to do. And so the mercantilism starts to chew away at it sometimes, and you have to keep fighting to do the education, but not to hurt the art form, because the most important thing we do is create a great dance. And then people will come and you'll get more funding and more. And so in that way, sometimes I find that in Quebec, art is a bit more anarchy, it's a bit more provocative. They attack the politicians a lot more, they're much more outspoken that way, and the arts are shocking, it's about looking at ourselves, and Michel Tremblay started that, that harsh, critical look at ourselves. And then we realize we can move forward, that through the theater, you theatricalize emotion, and you understand jealousy and things that, can make us better. And that's, as I was saying, you learn about yourself. But so in that way, it was interesting, because when I came here from Quebec, I realized that artists were a bit of a civil service. By the time you filled out all the form and did everything, and be careful, the repertoire and the sponsors, and suddenly you realize you spend most of your time, it's good causes for community, but you spend very little time creating art, and that takes its time. It takes solitude and reflection and time in the studio with the dancers to go more in subtlety, and so it's sometimes I feel that we have to be careful, because trying to connect them to the community that way is very important, but it starts to hurt the product itself. Yeah.
So if there's one thing that you try to chip away at
Yes.
as artistic director of Alberta Ballet, given all those themes you brought up?
What do you mean chip at?
Like those issues of spreading too thin to reach the community, or those issues of disconnectedness and technology.
Yes.
Of all those themes you're bringing up, what's the one thing you just try to chip away at in the work that you do at Alberta?
You mean to go deeper into it?
Yeah, like what the one thing you're trying to really accomplish and you can walk away from?
I think it's probably what makes me happiest, and that's when we touched people. It's when you did something that brought people closer to their own humanity, and that's an extraordinary feeling. We just brought les Grands Ballets Canadiens de Montréal that came to Calgary and Edmonton with Matsek, a genius, and it was a Sleeping Beauty. And I had over 400 calls of complaints after that, because it's such a disturbing work. But it's a brilliant work, and it's danced all over the world by the greatest companies. And so, I had to tell our staff that they had to be on the phone for a week taking complaints that, it's still important that we do it.
Yeah.
It's still important that we move people, that we shake people, that we, sometimes emotion gets so much in us. There's so much tragedy in our life or great joy, but there's emotional, I call that the emotional cholesterol. And the valves start moving, and the body starts to go emotionally rigid. And art shakes you up, makes you cry, makes you laugh, makes you feel beauty or truth. And suddenly the valves start working again, and then you get rid of a bit of that cholesterol, And if not, you see people jamming up. And sometimes you'll see somebody who comes to a ballet, and they've never been to art in a long, long time, and they're so emotional after the show. They come backstage, and that's extraordinary, because that's what I think we're trying to do, is to keep us human that way.
Do you think 400 angry phone calls is a good sign?
I remember I kept talking about the Rite of Spring and the Agnilev, in Nijinsky, the scandal at the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and people throwing. I said, wasn't that bad, was it? No. I said, but if we never get reactions like that, then everything we're going to do is vanilla ice cream, and it's not that we're looking for provocation in art. We really didn't want to make people upset, but it's for sure that there will be moments like that, and you have to accept when they come. I remember, I think it was the National Art Gallery, had a whole collection of paintings from the Middle East, and it was due to open, I think, a month after 9/11. And the National Art Gallery decided to do it. And they got criticized, and it was awful for them, but they did it. And I thought, good on them, that they brought these artists, and that there was something going on at that level.
You need a good emotional riot every now and again.
Well, I need my art to go, and I need to be stimulated all the time. I don't know what it is. I feel maybe I'm more pessimistic than I used to be, but the last 10 years, I find it very difficult to connect, with, and it's so important that I go to music and theater and things or watch intelligent television, there's something about it that I'm needing more and more as I get older. And I realized that the artistic experience, which is really, John Dewey wrote about it in Harvard, an incredible lecture on the aesthetics of art, John Dewey. And the aesthetic experience is really a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so we're going to look at something, and we're going to have a conclusion. There's a curve of learning in this piece of art, and sometimes it's just a question, the question that gets deeper. But if the aesthetic experience has a beginning, a middle, and an end, you learn something. And if you apply that to your own life and everything you live, you take the time to see what happened and how next time, you get better at it. And I think it was Cocteau who said, once you open your eyes to the real experience of life, you can never close them again. And arts help us open the eyes that way. And he talked about that, and you can never close them again. And that is true, because if you live really with passion for arts and culture, it intensifies as you age. It doesn't get duller. And I think that, that's when I realized that the intensity of our life, as my little quote, is directly proportionate to the acuity of your senses. So that if your vision is amazing, and your smell and your taste and your emotions, everything is acute, and you keep it going in your life, then the intensity of life increases, because you're connected to these things and you're not atrophied. And so the culture is important for that, because they keep us stimulated that way at all levels.
You may not be able to close art, but I think we need to close this conversation for now.
Yeah, I'm French. I keep talking.
Thanks very much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Are the credits rolling?
Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.